Again, this is not an attack at Sasha. Since the video last Friday, people have been sending me videos asking me to react to give an insight. One video has been suggested by 3 to 4 people. I'm going to be reacting to that video today. Now, before I do so, and for the first time in 3 years being here on YouTube, I feel as though I need to pre-qualify myself so that my reactions and my insights are taken for what they essentially are. This is my certificate. I'm a qualified financial advisor. I qualified back in May 2014. If that doesn't mean anything to you, I've also worked for a pension provider for 5 years in Canary Wharf. So this is not a contradiction or an attack at the creator, and I do want to get straight to it. So let's go.
Hey guys, it's Sasha. This video might go against everything you've heard in terms of advice on YouTube and everywhere else. In fact, it goes against some of the things that I've previously said as well, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to be hitting the dislike button before I've even managed to finish the sentence, but just hear me out because it's an actual really important point to what I'm saying that I'm going to demonstrate with numbers. Every single bit of advice out there says that you should go and invest in your pension. I've said it before in videos, every single other YouTuber that you watch will tell you exactly the same thing, but it's really important to be aware of how the numbers actually work out and how you might actually be better off not investing in your pension account.
All right, okay, so I think I know where this is going already. Look, the onus is on you to invest and plan for your own retirement, right? The responsibility doesn't lie with anybody aside from you. A pension is essentially a wrapper when you invest. So it's like a sweet, right? You have a wrapper for a particular type of sweet. The same thing applies to a pension. Now, whether you use a pension, whether you use an ISA, whether you use just a general investment account to do so is completely down to you. Hopefully you're taking advice. And when I say advice, I mean proper advice, not just YouTubing things to find out what you should be doing. Because the reality is that pensions specifically have tax advantages that are much, much bigger and more important to consider when you are progressing through life stages. I think I know where this is going, but let's carry on.
One of the things I'm going to be talking about, I reckon some people probably don't even know about. And this is exactly why you need to listen up, because this is really important. Now, first, let me get straight to the point. Saving money for retirement is a good thing. I understand it, I advise it, and I think that it is good to plan ahead for your future.
I mean, look, we should never be advising anything here on YouTube. We just shouldn't. Like, YouTube should not be your source of advice. I mean, look, as an example, if you needed like your tooth taken out, are you going to go to YouTube for the expertise, or are you going to go to a dentist? If you needed surgery, are you going to go to YouTube for, I don't know, an explanation of how to perform a surgery and get someone on there to tell you what needs to happen? Or are you actually going to go to a qualified professional to do that? Because we're talking about money here doesn't make that fact any less true. So we should never be advising, and please don't take any advice here from YouTube. I'm a qualified financial advisor. You shouldn't even be taking my advice because I don't know your personal circumstances. Finance is personal, and therefore, especially when you invest, there are so many moving parts that could change, things that will be applicable, things that won't be applicable based on your own personal circumstances. So please just be mindful of that.
However, there are some things that you need to be aware of when doing the right thing, because sometimes doing the right thing and making monthly pension contributions can actually be really bad for you. Here is why. Let's take an average person in the UK earning the average UK median wage. According to the Office of National Statistics, it is £585 per week, using the latest available published data from a couple of years ago. That's about £30,000 per year.
Okay, so this is from 2018. We're in 2022 now. I think he made this last year, so the numbers are probably a bit out of date and stuff. So let me just caveat that anyway.
The minimum amount you have to contribute in the UK, unless you opt out, is 5% by you, with your employer adding a further 3% for a total of 8% of your salary. Now,
which is free money, which is fantastic. I mean, the UK, I come from a place of being of Nigerian descent. I was born here in the UK, but I've also seen life in Nigeria. We take for granted some of the privileges that we have. Things like auto enrollment, where your employer has to pay into a pension for you. Compulsory is a gift. It really, really is. Not all countries have that. And so when we talk about free money, and this is why I always say to people that, if you are working in a workplace, you should definitely be opting into your pension. And the opt-out rates, I don't know what the opt-out rates are of more recent years, but when auto enrollment was first introduced, we had high opt-out rates. I was working in Canary Wharf for a pension provider at that point in time. They've come down now, but it is free money, and that's one thing that is a massive, massive privilege to us here in the UK.
Aware that these are calculated slightly differently to how I'm going to be talking about them here, but I'm just trying to make a point, and I'm going to keep things super simple. So 8% of £30,420 is £2,433 per year in pension contributions, which is equivalent to about £202.80 per month. Now, I did the maths over here. To keep things simple, I'm going to assume that people start work at 21. Let's say the average person goes to university, which I think at the moment is correct, and they get paid this median wage for their entire working life until they're retired age 68. Now, I know that some people start...
Okay, so look, you can assume that, but that's assuming that everybody opts in from the get-go. And we know that not everybody does still, even at this point. But we need to take that into consideration as well, because not everybody opts into their pension straight off the bat. And 8% is a great number to begin with. If you read books like Richest Man in Babylon, 10% is often banded around as to being the figure that if you're able to retain or invest 10% of what you earn on a yearly basis, you're guaranteed, or at least on the road, because there are no guarantees, to being wealthy, to being the richest man in Babylon, so to speak, right? Now, your pension is 8% of that. So now, with your pension contributions, if you're able to make other adjustments elsewhere, you're on a great path. If you start early enough, and this is the big, big point, if you start early enough to being the richest man in Babylon, quote unquote.
Much earlier at 16, and I know some people are going to be earning much less, some people are going to be earning much more, some people are going to start earning a lot less, and then it's going to grow and they're going to be earning way more down the line. I don't want to keep things difficult and have 1 million scenarios.
That's 100%. So I think what I do like that he's doing here is he's just assuming that your earnings are exactly the same from when you started out taking the average. I think that's the right thing to do, because at the end of the day, when you start progressing, you start earning more money, the 8% obviously becomes bigger, and that can convolute and make the numbers really complex. So just taking the median makes sense.
I'm going to keep things really basic so that you can understand the point I'm trying to make here. Let's assume that your pension grows an average of 8% per year. This is actually pretty reasonable, especially with the new SIP pensions that are arriving. I personally am using the new free trade one. They are currently, I think, back to having an open list after having a short window when they accepted people, but I think it's going to be opening up again very soon.
Okay, so the 8% here, I mean, he's using this based on the SIP pensions that are arriving with, trading, free trade he mentioned here, right? Now, I think it's really important to understand how pensions actually work. And this is where, I think you need to have and definitely take with a pinch of salt the stuff that you watch here on YouTube. Because at the end of the day, you have to have an understanding of how workplace pension schemes work in order for you to be able to qualify a statement like 8% and having that being a reasonable return. The reality is that most people who opt into their workplace pension, where they're getting the 5% from their employer, they're paying in 3%, almost everyone goes into a default plan. And a default plan is essentially a plan that will have equal equity, equal bonds. And specifically when it comes to retirement and investing for retirement, the main thing you need to consider is time. So if you are starting out at age 20, great, fantastic. But the question is, are you in a position where your money is invested in the best way possible, in the most aggressive way possible to take the most advantage of the time you have to invest, which if you're in your 20s is probably going to be 40 odd years. Now, the reality is most people go into a default fund. equal opportunity bonds, equal opportunity sort of equities, which means that your money's not really working hard for you. Now, with that being said, then you cannot then assume that that fund is going to do 8%. So this is a broad statement, a broad assumption to make. It's pretty reasonable. It depends on how your money is invested. It depends on what you're invested in. Now, in a workplace scheme, if you are in the default fund, and this is something I coach people all the time, one of the first things I ask people to go and check is, are you in the default fund in your workplace pension? If you're not, you want to go into something else that's going to be more aggressive. But you need to be fully aware of all of the options that are available to you so you can pick the best fund. Only then can this statement of 8% being quite reasonable stand true to a certain extent, depending on how you've invested. Let's move on.
I think this is a reasonable, somewhat conservative, maybe even in some ways, assumption from my perspective. With monthly contributions of £202.80, the total pot at age 68, according to all these assumptions, is going to be £1,252,000. And according to data...
I mean, look, that number's very, very nice. And it's all very well and good. I think I would assume that he's compounded these calculations up, right? If you start at your 20s, yes, you can 100% get there. It's why I am so passionate about pensions. For anyone who's been following me for any period of time, you probably heard me speak about the fact that my dad at age 58 wanted to retire and realized he had no pension provision whatsoever. I care about this topic because I saw my dad effectively work till he was 60. He died working. I'm always a big advocate of people taking action on their retirement plans sooner rather than later. But I think this example right here, I mean, the audiences here on YouTube are relatively young anyway, and that's a good thing. I think we do need people from different backgrounds and different voices sharing information like this. But the reality is that not a lot of people are going to end up with £1 million in their pension pot. And actually, this is borne out in the data by the Office of National Statistics. So all you basically need to do is Google, and I've just done this. I had to stop recording and come back on here. Google the average UK pension pot by age. Now, this is by a company called Ocam Investing. But all of the information here is actually taken from the Office of National Statistics and is accurate as of 2022. We're currently in April 2022. So if you go and click on this one right here, average pot, pension pot UK by age, is going to bring you to this graph right here. Now, this tells you that if you're age 35 to 45, the average pension pot is £30,600. That's the pension pot size. So this assumption that the average person is going to reach £1 million is not true. We have a huge problem here in this country at the moment with people paying into their pension pot. The gap is absolutely huge, even for people who are much older. If you're in the 55 to 64 range, the average pot size is £189,700. If you're between 65 and 74, it's only £190,000. This is a long way away from the assumption that everyone or the average person is going to amass £1 million in pension income, a pension pot, I should say. Yes, hopefully, utopia, that's where we want to be, but there are massive challenges. And the reality is that you also need to dissect down the population as well. For most men who work in professional environments, because men tend to do the bulk of work without taking maternity leave, you then start getting into things like, the gender pension gap. And this is another article here, which is actually, this is research done by L&G, which is Legal & General, by the way, which they're an investment firm. They're basically saying here that the gender pension gap is 17% at the beginning of a woman's career and reaches 56% at retirement compared to men. And what that basically means is that the level of contribution that women are making into their pensions for retirement purposes is basically a vast chasm. It is absolutely huge. I work with brands that are still trying to combat this right now. And this is a multifaceted issue that we face here in the UK. So this is assumption that all of a sudden, the average person is going to get to £1 million in a pension pot is unfortunately untrue. It's just not the reality.
Now, here's the catch. A few years ago, the UK government passed some new legislation which introduced the lifetime allowance for pensions.
I know exactly where he's going with this, which is what I thought. He's going to talk about the lifetime allowance. Now, the lifetime allowance is essentially, it's a threshold of how much you can have within your pension, or you can accumulate into your pension over the course of your lifetime, i.e. the lifetime allowance. Now, the lifetime allowance has been reduced over the years and currently is just over £1 million. So I think where he's going to go with this, and we'll have a look at this in a moment, is the fact that if you go over the lifetime allowance of £1 million, there is a tax charge of 55%. This is where I assume he's going to go, which, okay, you need to consider that you could be breaching an allowance that could mean that you've got to pay 55% tax, but it's 55% tax on the amount that you go over. I hope that he actually covers that nuance, because that's an important nuance. But even with that being said, there are some really clever financial planning tactics that you could use to negate that 55% tax charge. I hope that he mentions some of this as well, but let's have a look.
This is the maximum amount that you can have in your pension pot at the point when you choose to retire. This allowance is currently set at £1,073,100. And yes, it does rise with the Consumer Prices Index every single year by a little bit, but I am on purpose using a relatively modest assumption of 8% on the returns. I think I could have set that to 9% or even 10%, depending on how you manage those investments over time and the kind of risks you take.
Again, this is assuming that you're in an adventurous fund within a workplace pension scheme and not, I mean, look, you've used 5 and 8%, which is auto enrollment workplace pension scheme, but you're referring to SIPs, which are outside of the workplace pension scheme. So you're comparing apples and eggs here, and like they're not the same thing. So it's not a valid comparison to make. If you're controlling the investments yourself, then yes, absolutely, you might be able to get that. But you're assuming, you're now going to 9% per year. If you're in a workplace scheme and you're in a default, you're not going to get that. So the context and the nuance to the detail here is really, really important, because, pensions are a very specialist area.
So what happens to money in your pension pot if you go over this lifetime allowance, as the average person, according to his calculations, will? You guessed it, you will be taxed on it, and you will be taxed a lot. It's gonna get really ugly. If you take any of it as a lump sum when you retire, because when you retire, you're allowed to take 25% of your pension tax free. That's kind of the rules, right? But any amount over the lifetime allowance, you will have to pay 55% tax on that money. Yep, you heard that right.
Okay, so a little bit of detail here, which I think is worthwhile pulling out. So I'm going to keep these numbers fairly simple. If you have a £1.1 million pension pot, you'll be charged 55% tax on anything over the lifetime allowance. So let's just keep the numbers simple. The lifetime allowance is £1 million in this example. You have 1.1 million in there. You're going to be charged 55% on that £100,000 that you have over the lifetime allowance. The lifetime allowance charge isn't on the entire amount that you have within your pension. So it's not 55% charge on 1.1 million quid. He did kind of allude to it in this video, in that section right there. But I think a further explanation is really, really important.
55% tax. Now, if you choose to take it out as an annuity, so sort of the monthly payments instead, you will have to pay.
See, now, an annuity, people don't use that as the default. I mean, that wasn't the case since 2015, at least, right? So this bit is at least 7 years out of date by now, because annuities are no longer compulsory. An annuity used to be compulsory. Now, everybody goes into drawdown. And maybe I need to do another video where we talk about drawdown specifically. It's quite a broad topic. But people generally go into drawdown now. They don't have to annuitize anymore, because annuity rates were so poor, and it's just not good value for money. So using an annuity in the context of this conversation, if you're talking about it in regard to drawdown, yeah, then it makes sense. I mean, even you're in drawdown, you're going to be paying tax on it. That tax charge is 25%, which is what I guess he's going to say next. But using annuity as the example, is outdated at this point.
25% tax on it. And then you still have to pay income tax on the remaining money. Now, the money advice.
That is true. That is very, very true. So even with the additional 55% or 25% charge that you have on the amount over your lifetime allowance, your income tax is still going to be an important part for you to consider, because that could take a massive chunk off people if you don't properly plan for your retirement from a tax point of view. And I'll talk about that in a moment.
This is really, really helpful in explaining that means for every £1,000 that you have in your pension over this limit, you're actually only going to get £450 back paid to you in your pension, which doesn't sound so great, suddenly, does it? Now, I would wager a lot of people have never actually heard of this pension lifetime allowance, because for some reason when the government introduced it, they didn't do a particularly good job of teaching people, explaining to people, especially young people who maybe don't think too hard about their pensions, because the government wants to go and encourage people to do the right thing, which is contribute to your pension.
Okay, so this is very, very true, actually. Look, a lot of people won't know what the lifetime allowance is. But I think if you're going to broach this kind of subject, the education piece around things that you can do and really the context of it, the average person is not going to have £1 million in their pension pot. If they did, a lot of people would be living very comfortably right now. The opposite is actually happening. If you start young enough, yes, you will. But let's be completely 100% honest. If you get to the point where you've got £1 million in your pension pot, right, you have other issues. There are other mechanisms that you can use, things to consider. You're probably going to be taking professional advice, not sitting on YouTube watching this video or any other video for that matter, trying to decide how you're going to tax efficiently take your income. No, this is what financial advisors get paid for and are very, very good at. How you can structure your income in retirement so you don't have to pay 40% tax if you're a higher rate tax bracket. And hopefully, in the journey to you amassing £1 million into your pension, you've hopefully taken advice as well with retirement in mind, so that you're not going to arrive at your retirement date with £1 million in your pension pot, over £1 million over the lifetime allowance, right? You're laden with 55% lifetime allowance charge of, because you've worked hard and you've done the right thing, as Sasha puts it here, and it is the right thing to do, and then you're stuck. No, you should be taking advice and be planning for this. Like, this is a long-term journey with foresight, thinking about things, planning appropriately. Hopefully that's what you've done.
This is the really odd thing. Using the government's own data, there is a decent chance that more than half of all the people in jobs contributing to pensions for their lives will actually be breaking this lifetime allowance limit.
No, it's not. That's not true. I mean, I want to see the sources, but that's not true. Like, I've worked in pensions for a number of years, and I know that isn't true. Anyway, look, I think I get the gist of what he's talking about here. He's talking about the lifetime allowance being the main component, really, that many people will be surprised about when they get to retirement age with a really nice sized pension. Now, look, from a financial planning point of view, there are things that you can actually do to help you reduce your lifetime allowance. So, for example, he spoke about the tax-free cash or the pension commencement lump sum. That's 25% or a quarter of the amount that you amass within your pension pot. Now, if you have £1 million in there, that's £250,000, which you can take as a one-off payment, completely tax-free. You can do with that money whatever you please. Now, the pure function of taking out that 25% allotment from your pension reduces the amount that you have within your pension. In some cases, it means that actually, if it brings you below the lifetime allowance, actually there is nothing for you to basically be charged 55% on. I've worked on cases like that as a qualified person, being in the pension industry, being qualified and working with financial advisors in the past. So there's a lot of nuance here. And I think we have a little bit of responsibility here on YouTube. And this isn't a stab at Sasha. So please, if you're watching this and you watch his channel as well, don't go and start beating the drum or Pete's critiquing you. It's not about that at all. It's about providing information from a balanced point of view. The reality is that if you are lucky enough to be able to pay into a pension over the course of your working life and you get to £1 million, you're probably one of the top 10%, 5% of individuals in this country to be able to do that. The lifetime allowance was brought in for a reason. It was brought in because they didn't want top execs in the city who are on mega money plowing a load of money into a pension and passing that down, which leads us on to other things that people don't talk about when it comes to pension, which is particularly pertinent if you're in this position where you're going to have £1,000,000 in a pension pot. If you think about taxation, and people have been on the back of Rishi Sunak and his wife not paying tax here in the UK, and I explained that the fact that we have loopholes where people can legally avoid taxes. Things like your pension, if you're lucky enough to have £1,000,000, is outside of your estate for inheritance tax planning, right? Which is a big, big, big thing. I mean, inheritance tax charge at the moment, 2022, is 40%. Your ISAs, your general investments, everything else is inside your estate for inheritance tax purposes. Your pension isn't. You have a reduction. So if you die before 75, and many people ask, well, does my pension die with me? Well, no, it doesn't. You can pass it on to wife, to kids, to grandparents, grandkids if you wanted to. You can pass it down the line. You do that before 75, there is zero tax to pay. If you pass it on past 75, well, the person who is taking ownership of that lump sum from your pension will pay their nominal rate. Now, if that person's a 20% taxpayer, that's 20%, not 40%. So there are benefits to pensions when it comes to tax planning specifically. And look, I don't make the rules up, so don't shoot the messenger here, right? But at the end of the day, we can moan about wealthy people not paying taxes, but these are the kind of loopholes and allowances within our laws that we can use as ordinary people. The frustrating thing for me is that oftentimes they're available and we have misinformation discouraging people from using those mechanisms or being in a position where they can use those mechanisms later on in life. We need to be a little bit better about being curious and seeking both sides of the coin, particularly when it comes to matters of investing and various investment wrappers, because this kind of stuff will mean that someone who's maybe in their 20s will just be like, I'm not going to pay into a pension, or someone in their 40s will be like, I'm not going to bother with a pension, when it's actually the right thing for you to do. You can figure out the tax position later on. That's when you need a professional. And that's when you should be taking professional advice, not sitting on YouTube, not watching a video and trying to use that as the basis for all your financial decisions. That would be a mistake. So I hope you found this useful. If there are other videos that you would like me to react to, then by all means, ping them over as suggestions. Again, this is not an attack at Sasha. The last time I made a video where I made a little bit of a critique and I didn't even mention him, there was a post on this channel where people were slagging me off and people told me who obviously watch his channel. This is not an attack on Sasha or anything like that. This is just providing some clarity, some nuance on a topic that I happen to be very, very passionate about because of the fact that I watched my dad struggle and die working when he actually wanted to retire way, way earlier. So take this as it's intended. I'll catch you on Friday.